Hello, I'm Stars Voyles, and I'm a junior theater major here at GCS. Now, those of you who know me fairly well have probably assumed that I'm going to tell you all about Irish theater, give you some historical context to it all. I did consider that, but I chose instead to go with my first love, Japan. I'll be discussing the effects of Westernization on one of the major Japanese theater styles, that being Kabuki. As we all know, after America dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and Japan's unconditional surrender after the Second World War, America decided to occupy Japan. During this occupation, America chose to rebuild Japan, but in a way that would be pleasing to them. According to Barbara Thornbury in America's Kabuki Japan, 1952 to 1960, Image Building, Myth-Making, and Cultural Exchange, during the occupation, American-Japanese relations usually rested on the assumed superiority of American culture. Along the way, the occupiers decided that Kabuki was a gateway into Japanese culture and an essential part of it, something which should be preserved at all costs. During the war, it was decided that Kabuki was the perfect example of the evils of Japan, so this reversal is something of interest. During the occupation, a Westerner by the name of Fabian Bowers was the theater censor, giving him a similar power to the British Master of Revels, allowing him to decide when, where, and what productions, if any, would be performed. In Thornbury's article, Restoring an Imagined Past, the National Theater and the Question of Authenticity in Kabuki, Bowers was a major player in the push to restore Kabuki and present a whole form of the art. Unfortunately, this went over like a lead balloon, with one critic saying that there was no flowering of Kabuki, as there should be, and that it came off as more of a university lecture than a proper performance. And yet Bowers is still credited as the man who saved Kabuki. Bowers, in true post-World War II racism, found it to be his job, presumably as the Great White Savior, to keep Kabuki alive so that Japan would not lose its history. This carried over into the goals of the Kokiritsu Gekijo, driving them to define and then redefine what authentic Kabuki was. Unfortunately, doing so can often divorce a play from its historical context, ironically doing the exact opposite of the mandate. In 1966, the my apologies, it's been 12 years since Japanese. The Kokuritsu Gekijo, Japan's National Theater, was founded. Part of its mission was to present authentic Kabuki, though given the age and fluidity of these plays, this was a decided challenge, which in some cases led to outright playwriting to replace missing or ambiguous scenes. When they weren't replacing elements, they were trimming them away so as to limit running time. There were some instances where full plays were performed, but they were broken into sections. Even here, though, they did a poor job of it, as acts were performed out of order, such as a production of Kanadehon Kushimura, where it was performed over 3 years, starting in 1973, with Acts 5, 6, 7, and 11 in the first year, Acts 2, 8, and 9 in the second, and finally, Acts 1, 3, and 4 were in the third year, while Act 10 was altogether ignored and not performed. It wouldn't be until 1986 for the play to be presented properly. Many Westerners, when confronted with Kabuki, would praise it, but more in a backhanded manner. James Michener says of Kabuki that some plays are tedious, that all are too long, and that the style of acting was so overpowering that more discerning audiences would be driven away from such unsophisticated acting. Thornbury claims that this was more done as a warning to Westerners in a time where many were arguing that Kabuki needed to be brought to America and shown to Western audiences. However, I have a very hard time believing such a thing. Outside the occupation's effects on Kabuki, there were still some Western influences that appear in much smaller ways. In Samuel Leiter's article, 4 Interviews with Kabuki Actors, he tells of an interview with Onoi Baiko, a Kabuki actor. Mr. Leiter asked if Baiko-sama had ever studied techniques not traditionally used in Kabuki. Baiko-sama tells of an experience he had watching Wuthering Heights, and how he in turn used it to influence a performance he gave when the princess had returned to the moon. He also tells of how one director used Stanislavski's techniques to direct him in another role. So what do I think of all this? I have long had the opinion that America had no business doing pretty much anything it did, starting with the dropping of the bombs, demanding Japan's unconditional surrender, and then making Japan sign a treaty that left them without a military force at all. With this in mind, I feel that the influence of the West, even in such small ways as an actor being directed with Stanislavski's techniques, to be in the long term damaging to Kabuki as a whole. The idea of replacing supposedly missing parts of plays written in a form that is meant to be fluid and changeable, with the intention that they are to be permanent parts of the play, is almost abhorrent to me. Kabuki was not meant to be static, like many Western plays are. I know that Stanislavski's technique is designed to start with the internal forces, which then drive the external, which is what Kabuki's style also prescribes. But then I wonder, why turn to a Russian teacher from the 1800s when Kabuki has its own, much older set of techniques that do the same thing? Techniques that are more in line with how the plays themselves are written. Near as I can tell, all of this is combining to do one thing and one thing only: reduce the otherness of Japanese theater, and thus make it more palatable to Western audiences, and yet turning away the original audience, the Japanese. If the supposed reconstruction of a disappearing art that was actually not disappearing nor in need of reconstructing at all is feeling to the creators of said art to be more like a lecture, why go see it at all? Still, despite all of this, Kabuki is still going strong. According to an article from 2010 in the Japan Times, Kabuki is still a highly popular genre, which may in fact be boasting its highest popularity with 3 million fans. There's even something called Cinema Kabuki, which started in 2005. Cinema Kabuki are films which allow audiences to see it in movie theaters. The Kabuki-za, the main theater in Tokyo for traditional Kabuki, has been hosting year-round performances since 1991 as a result of this popularity. If nothing else, Kabuki doesn't seem to be going anywhere. Thank you.